hear me? Someone just said the mic's very quiet, but I think it's just because everyone's very loud. My name's Susan Chrysos. I'm very pleased to see so many back.
Can we settle down for the debate now? Thank you. This is the exciting part.
Hi, welcome back everybody. My name's Susan Chrysos. I'm so pleased to see so many people still here. We've got this wonderful big debate about to start. Unfortunately, Sally Crowe was going to be facilitating this debate, but she's not very well, so she's not been able to join us today. But in her place, we've got Richard Thompson in the corner, who are going to make an excellent job of that. I'm really hoping that somewhere in the audience, I've got 9 panel members. I think I managed to identify most of you. I think the purpose for this debate, and we're doing this quite in a novel way, so rather than have our panel members sitting up the front and responding to questions from the audience, we want to shake things up a bit, as we've tried to do throughout the conference, and be a bit innovative. You will have received in your delegate information 9 questions from our panel members to yourselves. So hopefully you've had time to reflect on those questions. And for the next 90 minutes we will be discussing those questions one by one with each of the panel members. And basically what we're trying to get is some novel insight on many of the issues around evaluation that we've been listening to today. As I said, Lynn and Richard are going to chair. The panel members are scattered amongst you in the audience, and we will ask them to stand up and identify themselves when they ask their question. And I think I'll hand that over to Lynn. Lynn's going to just now talk to you briefly about... Okay, so yeah. So Lynn's going to talk to you now about the process for the debate, and then we're going to hand over to Lynn Corner and Richard Thompson.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, at the back. Okay. So the idea is that... oh, sorry. Oh, go on.
Okay, so just a few instructions really about how we're running the debate and to make sure you get the best out of it. So when you're going to ask a question, if you can wait your turn to respond to the question, chairperson will indicate when you need to do that. Remember to wait for the microphone. When you have the microphone, please introduce yourself. Please do keep your comments to the question that's under discussion. As Susan says, there's 9 questions. We'll move through them all and we'll try to make sure that we dedicate the same time to each question. So you will have the opportunity to address them all at some point. If there are some of you in the audience who do have a question or you do have a comment that you would like to raise, but you don't feel comfortable raising that question yourself, standing up and saying that yourself, feel free to write it down, pass it to a person beside you and ask them to read it out on your behalf. That's fine. We really do want to encourage everyone to be involved, but that's not necessarily to say everybody wants to be involved in the same way. Enjoy it. Thank you.
Right, can people hear me? Good. I once went to a conference where someone said at the front, "Can you hear me at the back?" And one of the people at the back said, "I can hear you perfectly well, but I'm happy to move to somewhere where you can't be heard." Right, we've already had the process explained. It's a bit of an experiment this, but I'm sure it's going to work well. So we're going to start off with Patricia Wilson. Where are we, Patricia? Do introduce yourself and let's have your question. Microphone, please. Where's the student? Where have they gone? Who's got the microphones? Ah, right.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tricia Wilson. Oh, okay. So my question is, if patient and public involvement is seen as an integral part of the research process, which I believe it is, then can it and should it be evaluated as a separate entity?
Ooh. Right, respondents to that question. Who's going to kick us off? Go on, be bold. One here. And then one over there. Just if people can pass the microphone along.
Hello, I'm Rachel Paczynski. I'm Research Engagement Officer for NCT. And thank you for that question, Patricia. That was really great. It just reminded me of something. I gave a presentation at an MPEU event quite recently, and my challenge to the research team there was that, you know, when I'm talking to people about PPI, I kept saying to researchers, what do you want to gain from PPI? And I get this really blank look back. Because no one would actually say, I just want funding for my study, but they didn't also have much else an idea of what they could get out of it. And actually, shortly after that, one of the statisticians on the unit came up to me and he said, brilliant, well done, I'm really glad you said that. He said, when he first got involved more and more with that unit as a statistician, he did so because I think NIHR had said statisticians need to be an integral part of study teams, and he kept saying to researchers then, so what do you want the stats on this study to achieve? And again, he got the same blank face. So I think that's a really good question, actually. Maybe we should stop fretting about it and just say, it's in here, it's integral. Let's leave it at that.
Thank you. There was another comment over. You've got, yes, please.
It's Maureen, Tricia, who sat opposite you at dinner last night, so you know a lot about what I was thinking yesterday. As someone that's been involved in PPI for 8 years, and my face appears on several posters here from Nottingham University in this same dress. Only I don't look quite so good now as I did last year. I'm really worried about this conference. To be very honest, I probably didn't really think about this concept of evaluating us. I was just so excited that there was a conference for us. So I think, first of all, I need to probably put that down as the context in which I came. I was very upset by that opening exercise that was conducted where the hall was asked about evaluating us. I thought, what a horrible way to start a conference. And my next thought was, the person that asked this, how is she going to use that as a piece of research? I asked 500 people what they thought, etc. So I'm afraid my first impressions were a little bit jaundiced. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that before you can evaluate PPI, it has to be properly resourced, it has to be properly trained, it has to be properly embedded in studies so that it's not tokenistic. And the people that actually are PPI volunteers come often with a huge wealth of experience, education, and also they've often lived the very piece of research that they're trying to help researchers with. So I feel that we've been diminished at this conference by being discussed as a product that can be evaluated when actually you haven't even started to think about what our needs are. And I'll sit down.
Would anyone like to comment further on that? Who was next? Or other comments, of course. Okay. And there's one down from.
Maureen, we were speaking earlier about this exact thing. So I'm a researcher, but sort of heavily involved, work with service users to deliver and design research. And I think we were talking about it's a bit of a shame that it's a bit chicken and egg in the way that it does need to be properly funded to be done properly, but in some ways we need to get the evidence to argue for funding, and in some ways perhaps we have to play the strategic game for a while until we have it. You know, obviously everyone in this room is convinced of the value of service user involvement, but there are whole swathes of researchers out there that need yet to be, and so we just need to give them some evidence to help sway opinion, to help validate our opinion, and then that maybe the other things will follow the process. But it is very chicken and egg. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. There was another comment just here.
Yeah, the first thing I'd like to say is, follows on from the debate this morning, I absolutely reject the notion that patients can't be expert, that we're the only people in the room that are not allowed to be expert. I just wanted to start with that. And I wondered this thing about evaluation, and if we don't involve people involved in PPI in the critical evaluation to ensure that it's that's understandable and accessible. So if we don't do that, is it just another thing that we're doing to patients rather than with them? And I think that feeds into the life.
Okay. Just to add a comment whilst we're getting the microphone to the next. I wanted to come back very briefly on the evaluating you comment there. I think very much we hoped this was about evaluating and understanding collectively together how we can best do this, including all of the things that you indeed mentioned there. So I hope we didn't present it in that way, but let's open it up to wider comments. Yes, there's a question here. And there's one over there.
So my name is Neil Davidson. I'm the medical lead of the Young Persons Advisory Group North England. And for those of you who missed our 6 young people talking last night about their involvement and how they evaluate, I think our young people would say very much the onus needs to be on the researchers to show that they have responded to the young people's involvement, or PPI in general, but also that coming back to the PPI group and showing, look, this is what you said, this is what we've changed, is a second check to make sure that the researchers have understood what the PPI involvement has said, made the relevant changes, and then move forwards. And without that, we don't know as a PPI group whether the researchers have heard the right messages and made the right changes. You need that second check, and actually this can't be separated out, and the onus needs to be put back on the researchers to come back and show, look, this is what we've done.
Hi, I wear 2 hats. I am a patient, various conditions, but I've also spent quite a long time in various PPI roles. So I have some sympathy with what was said, and there's often a frustration in patients because we want to know there's patients not part of PPI, and perhaps that's where it came from. But coming back to the question, for me, absolutely, it starts with what's the research about? Is it valid? Has it got an output that's going to make a difference? And if it does, then you take it forward. And you assemble a multi-disciplined, talented team, and one voice in that team is the patient. And it could be, I also suggest it's more than one patient. So back to the question, absolutely should be part of the process. And absolutely, the evaluation should not be of PPI. It should come back to the research, say, did you do what you said you would do? Did it add value? And as a sub-question, what contribution did each of your team make? One of those being patient voice.
Thank you. There's one here, please.
My name is Margaret O'Hara. I'm a PPI lead for University Hospitals Birmingham, but I'm also, before I did that, I was a researcher, and before I did that, well, still am a patient advocate. And for me, as a physicist, I'm a physicist by background, so for all my, there's been a, how do we get girls into physics? And for me, there's an analogy here, and I think if you look around the room, I think 90% of us are women. And I think that's partly because PPI isn't valued, and women do work that isn't valued. And basically, they don't want us in their club. Like, men don't want women at the top table. And as time goes on and all the reasons they give, like women aren't good enough and women aren't blah, 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 fall away, they have to come up with other reasons. So now they say, oh, you've got to prove why you should be at the top table. And I think there's a bit of an analogy with PPI. I think the evaluation thing, instead of just saying, we should be involved in research because of what Dave Green said this morning, like, you wouldn't do database research without a computer. Why would you do human-based research without humans? So instead of just saying, well, it's just obvious and it needs to be done, it's all, well, it shows it's worth it.
Thank you. We do have to limit ourselves to 10 minutes per question, so we've got one more comment for this one, please.
My name's Sue Fortescue, and I helped with the PPI aspects on the 5-year EPIC project. We have a poster at the back of the hall if you want some more information about that. And I'm now involved in the PPI aspects of a research proposal which will last for 6 years. I think a lot depends on how you define evaluation. PPI is such a new thing that I think we can still learn lessons. I think we do need to evaluate, but we need to evaluate in the sense of what lessons can we learn? What do we need to do better in future? What should we not do again? What mistakes did we make? So it should be evaluation for learning, not evaluation as a kind of a discipline.
Thank you.
Okay, so time for our second question. Natalie, where are you? We got a mic for Natalie. Fire away, Natalie.
Hi everybody, I'm Natalie Edelman, I'm a researcher at Brighton University. My question is, what if evaluation of patient and public involvement in a research study suggests it doesn't bring benefit to that study? Do we bin PPI? And I raise that because I'm really concerned that realistic that outcomes evaluation of the benefits of research to research quality might not give the answer we want, and I'm quite concerned about undermining the moral argument for PPI.
Right, lots of hands going up. So we'll have an answer here, and then we'll go to this side of the room.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Olivia, one of the PPI leads at the Aston UK Centre for Applied Research. I think you can answer it in two different ways. If you don't find that the evaluation of PPI is actually brought into your research study, have you had a broad enough group of PPI people to sort of give comments? But also it could be that you have sort of been heavily involved in doing PPI, so have learned a lot of lessons from it, and have sort of been able to make your study very sort of PPI friendly, I guess. But I think there's always a place for PPI because none of us are perfect, and everyone can make a change to everything, I think. So I think it's not sort of taking away the value of it, but I think there's always a place for it, even if your study you don't feel your study's benefited from it.
Yes. Another three questions over here. So lady in blue first, please.
Hello, I'm Anna Lawrence-Jones from Imperial College. I guess my point probably builds on a lot of Christina Staley's work and thinking about where did we start from. So there might be a researcher at Imperial, there's lots of different researchers who come from different levels. Some have loads of experience with PPI and some don't have any experience. So what if the researcher has developed an amazing project because they've worked with patients in other projects and learned from things in those projects which they've then taken forward? So this study, they might not, working with patients, carers and the public might not benefit that study because it's perfectly designed. So it depends on what level you start at, and if a researcher is already thinking more, or as they've learnt in other studies, they might have designed it really well. So that's
another perspective, absolutely. So two questions on this side, please, and then we're going to go over to you.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was the one. Doreen Tembo in IHR. Interestingly, I did a presentation on exactly this topic where we found out that the way that we were involving people in a process of our research funding was actually quite tokenistic. So we had to ask ourselves the very brave question of what do you do when you do an evaluation and actually it's shown not to work. But I think the key thing is to actually look, as has been mentioned, about what the purpose of the PPI was and how you're defining benefit. Because it could be that the impact and the benefit is not the impact that you're looking for, but it might have an impact on other levels. For example, we found that there was impact on the people that were involved, on the experts that were involved in the process as well, and them learning about PPI. Yeah. But I do think that ultimately, if it's not actually serving the purpose that you all agreed in a very co-produced way that was the purpose of the PPI, then we do have to be quite brave and say that perhaps for that particular study, it doesn't work. But I also think that looking more in depth into what kind of PPI might work for that context is really, really important as well. So I don't think it's a black and white answer. I think it depends on the initial reason that you're doing it, as well as looking at what else could you do. Because I think you might just say this is not working, but you need to think what could work as well.
So thoughtful and purposeful PPI is what you're recommending. Fantastic. Another question just to your right. The mic here. Fire away.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Doreen. I'm a researcher from Newcastle University. And my answer to this question is no, we don't bin the PPI. And you've alluded to some of the reasons. And I find it interesting that this question is looking at the benefits of PPI to the study. Are we actually doing PPI only for the benefit to the study? Why are we doing the study? Is it for ourselves? Is it for the study? Or is it for the end users of the studies themselves? That's the patients. And that's what we should really be looking at, the benefit of the PPI to the patients. Do they appreciate does the value of that PPI, does it make the end products of the research, the results, more relevant to the patients rather than, yes, we have, our questionnaires, we found more results or we found this. Now, the second thing is you find what you look for, and that is our findings from the evaluation is really based on how we carry out the evaluation. Is it based on numbers? You might not find any answers or any benefits if you look at the numbers. But if you look at, for instance, is the way we've carried out the study, is it more acceptable to the people that we're testing on, or to the patients, or to the children that we're speaking to? Then we might find benefit. So really, the concept of PPI is very complex, and how we evaluate it really depends on what we really look out for, and we might not be looking in the right direction. So I don't think we should be in it. I think we should really go on with the PPI. And now the third thing, is that PPI itself, the fact that we are involving patients in our studies itself, it tells us something about us valuing the input of the patients. It might not have any impact. You might not see any impact in the results. But that cultural, that ethical principle that underlies the fact that we've asked patients about what they think, I think that's also to be valued, and we can't measure that, or it's difficult for us to measure that.
Okay. Thank you. Lady in pink. Got a mic? So it's about sort of keeping an open mind and remembering, what's the Douglas Adams quote, that the answer to life, the universe and everything is 42. It's about being open to kind of different ways, much more kind of qualitative assessment than just metrics, I think, as well.
Hi, I'm Sam Robertson. I have two hats here. I'm the PPI lead for R&D in Sussex Partnership, but I also am a lead for the research theme called AIR, which is Approaches to Involvement and Recovery Research. And you've just taken a lot of my thunder, but I think I want to add to that, because when I first came into role, there was talk about evaluating PPI in terms of organisational benefit and study benefit. And I was very clear that actually I really wanted to explore PPI, the benefit to the people involved. And our research is in mental health, and for many people with mental health, it's a way also of bringing people back into the world, and in terms of redeveloping confidence, rediscovering their voice, and that kind of thing. So it's really important in that respect. But also, I think we're talking about research, and we often have this debate at my place about big R and little r. Mm-hmm. And the only research that's only value is a big R, i.e. conducted by people that are researchers. And my view on that is actually, no, we're all researchers. And part of my role as a theme lead is to support service users, carers, clinicians that wouldn't actually see themselves as researchers, be supported to take on research, that little r.
Mm-hmm. Lovely, okay. So one more question I think we've got time for. Well, might squeeze in two.
Thank you. Luca May Brady. So I'm a researcher doing work mainly around children and young people's involvement. And I think what struck me about this question and the previous one is actually something about taking a step back and thinking what it is we're evaluating, and whether evaluation is kind of proving that we've delivered certain things, or I think what struck me a lot about the conference in the last couple of days is all the sharing of learning and the openness about what hasn't worked and what people would have maybe done differently. And I think there's also, there's something about being able to do that. I think certainly in my field of work, I found that there's actually real dearth of evidence on who is involved and how they're involved and how
different approaches to involvement can mean that more diverse and inclusive public involvement. And I think something about that kind of qualitative evaluation about who is involved, how the difference it makes to them, as well as I think a lot of the focus on kind of metrics to measure the difference it makes to research. And I appreciate we need to do that. But there is something about, this isn't just about creating an evidence base to convince skeptics. It's also about actually those of us who are working in the field of public involvement and are committed to it. It will be really, really useful to have more evidence on what other people are doing and what they've learned. I think the 10 minutes was up there, Monica May, but some fantastic, fantastic comments. So, sir, if you hold your question for perhaps nearer the end, and then we've got a third question.
So, perfect timing there. So, Louise, where are we? Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Louise Locott from the University of Aberdeen, and I do quite a lot of research on PPI. And I'm not sure, I think this is a slightly devil's advocate question, but is getting more people to take part in medical research a good outcome for PPI, one that perhaps we could measure? And if so, why or why not, I'd add?
Who's going to address that one? One over here.
I think the answer to that question depends on who you are and where you are in the system. I personally think that maybe the question could be reworded to take part in good medical research rather than a good outcome for PPI, because as the speaker earlier on over there said, why are we doing this? It's actually for the patients at the end of the day. So it's not just about getting more people to take part in research, it's whether the research is actually relevant to those people. So it comes back to that evaluation question, but it's always useful for those of us who are involved in the NIHR, who are interested in getting research through the system quicker, to be able to recruit people into research and for them to have a good experience of it. That's really important and is one of the outcomes of PPI.
Okay, thank you. Question at the back. Comment?
Yeah, hi. I'm Audrey Esperance. I'm from the Center of Excellence on Partnership with Patients in the Public. We're based in Montreal, and I think it's interesting because one of the projects I was the most surprised and positively surprised about is a project that actually combined multiple modes of engagement, modes of involving patients within the project. So they had, developed PROMs and PRAMs, patient-reported outcome measures with patient partners, and they were consulting more patients during the clinical trial, and they had also focus groups helping them figure out if they were actually asking and getting the right data, and it made the partnership more meaningful because patient partners were involved in very specific manners in the research by becoming real research partners. And by real, I mean they were involved in analyzing the data that they helped construct in some ways and gather. It made more meaningful the partnership, and it also made more meaningful the consultation part of that study. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there's something in mixing the methods of involving patient, and in that way it helps everyone have a more meaningful role in the studies.
Thank you. I must admit it strikes me as a researcher, there's another question here, that whenever we ask a research question as researchers, we say, what's the question and what method best suits the way of answering that question? And yet far too many researchers say, we need PPI, therefore we're just going to do it this way, without thinking about what's the best method or approach or range of approaches to PPI that help to pursue what you're trying to achieve through that process. So I don't know how researchers lose that concept of appropriate method whenever they talk about PPI, but we do it too often, I fear.
I would agree with the gentleman there. It also would relate the debate. Just for our international people here,
And then there is a distinction between participation, which may be recruitment in clinical trials, engagement and involvement. So in many ways, recruitment is very attractive to clinical researchers, so that's what they aim for. But as a patient involvement professional, rather than a researcher working in clinical trials, I would say that there are many ways that good patient and public involvement could lead to better recruitment. So obviously, if we see it in this way, it can be one of the measurements. It cannot be the one, and according to my view, it's not a measurement of patient and public involvement. But if it can lead to better recruitment, then it's something that can definitely talk to researchers.
Thank you. One just here, and then one towards the back.
Hi there, I'm Corinne. I'm a research nurse and nurse researcher from Edinburgh. First of all, I would like to change the question to, rather than medical research, healthcare research. But I would say yes, that would be a good outcome, seeing more people getting recruited, because it would mean that through the patient-public involvement, the research will be better designed, so it will be more accessible for people to actually follow through that whole research process. You know, some of the follow-up that we see in research studies is asking quite a lot of patients at a difficult time in their life. So if it's better designed, then you'll get better recruitment, and as we were saying earlier, then the research will be completed in a more timely manner, and the treatments or whatever it is you're researching will be available in a more timely manner for the patients and public that it affects. So that's my opinion on that question.
Thank you.
Hello, Heidi Sarich from the NIHR. I just wanted to raise 2 points. If we're talking about taking part in medical research, as in participation, as in, you know, having intervention done unto, which I presume is what Louise is saying, yes, it's good if they understand totally why they are taking part and for what reason. And also, I think I've heard Joe Crocker speak too much in the last couple of weeks. Apologies to Joe, but as long as we retain the people in the research study as well. So it's the longevity of the impact of the PPI.
Thank you. A comment at the back. To put your hand up again, thank you.
Hi, I'm involved as a patient in research. I think it would be a good outcome because part of what I see as the role of patient involvement is increasing the conversation with the whole population about research, medical and any research. And I think it gets more people engaged in humanities endeavour to increase knowledge, so not just research as an academic thing going on, but something that we're all involved in as on a human population level.
Thank you. There's a comment in the middle, lady with the stripes.
Hi, Natalie Edelman again from Brighton University. My answer to this would be yes, and that's because in my own experience of doing PPI, it can really help to make the research accessible and acceptable to a much wider population and to more people, and that's massively important because what we're starting to learn is that we have intervention-generated inequalities, by which I mean the people who take part as participants in research are also the most enfranchised in society. So the more that PPI can enable us to really recruit and get data on the people who most need intervention, then that for me is like a double moral win in a way.
Thank you. Okay. If there's no more comments on this one, let's move on to the next question.
Sophie. Where's Sophie? Ah, there you are.
Can you stand up, Sophie?
Stand up and get a microphone.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just distracted by this lovely dog. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Sophie Staniszewska. I'm based at Warwick Medical School. And my question is, and I'm hoping for lots of challenging discussion and debate, what is stopping us from measuring the impact of PPI as a key part of evaluation?
Oh, right. Any responses? It's quite a thought-provoking one, that, isn't it? Right at the back.
A common set of indicators. That would be my only answer.
So can you speak up a bit?
A common set of indicators. We don't actually know what impact means, and we don't have necessarily a common view on that. And as long as we don't especially define what impact means for all of the parties involved in PPI, and I would point to patients in particular and citizens in particular, it will be impossible to really track the impacts, and it will be defined only by researchers and research funders and institutions, as long as there is not work done on the definition we give to what impact means, and we need to bring the voice of patients and citizens way more louder in the particular area than what we did, since last year.
So another comment down here, then another one at the back.
I was going to say there's nothing to stop you from measuring the impact of PPI and evaluation, because I'm a lay member, but I'm also a co-author that we're about to publish on measuring the impact of PPI on researchers, on research, and on the PPI volunteers. So I don't think there's anything stopping it. It's having the researchers and the authors' interest in PPI, and like if you're using PPI, it's for you guys to then sort of show how that's made a difference to your research. And I think it comes from a sort of behaviour change in how research is being done, rather than sort of it not being done because we can't, it can.
I see that. Right, at the back there's another question. Got a mic.
Something that's been bothering me for yesterday and today, and when we talk about PPI, I think we need to separate out public and patient involvement and the role of the PPI lead. And I use the parallel with HR. In a previous life, which was commercial life, and which was a long time ago because I'm getting on a bit, HR used to be known as personnel. And personnel did people. And they were on the outside, and they were not consulted. You went to them when you had a problem where you had to do something. And you don't have personnel departments anymore. You have HR departments. And it wasn't as simple as changing their name. What they did, instead of coming into the room as the expert in people issues, or PPI, and all the things you need to do, which brought problems into the room, they became the human resource person that talked the same language as the person commissioning the piece of work or the research. So they operated in that world was a commercial way, but it's a parallel in research. You have to talk the language and be a grown-up, I'm sorry if that's a bit insulting, and be in the room as a player talking about how do we make this work. And the second bit, here is a toolkit of how I can make your research better. So PPI for me, the involvement of patients and the public, I don't see an issue with that. My challenge to the people in this room, if you are a PPI lead, the game's with you, and it's a crucial stage. There's backlash coming against involvement of patients and public. And the PPI leads, it's our responsibility to take this to the next level. And that might be forming an association to get best practice amongst PPI leads, but we have to step up to the mark. Or I think the whole PPI stuff is going to arrive at a halt. Sorry, I'm a bit emotional about it because I absolutely buy into PPI, and I think it's quite threatened at the moment.
Has anyone got any to that? Doreen, do you want to respond?
Yes, although I'm not sure it's a response to a very important, I think, comment that you made. But I was just thinking, some of this has been covered already. But I'll challenge the question and say that kind of evaluation is becoming a key part of how people are taking forward, assessing whether PPI is working, how it works, what we can learn from the process. So I don't think that we are being stopped. It could be done better. But of course, not everybody thinks that we should be evaluating, so maybe that is a challenge, and maybe that is what's stopping some people from actually carrying out PPI. I think the other challenge as well is funding. Where do you get the funding to actually carry out evaluations of PPI, especially when it's not attached to an existing project? So I think that that's a big challenge. The other issue as well is there's different frameworks for assessing and carrying out evaluation, but again, going back to the measures comment, no agreed way. But there's a challenging question as well as to should we have standardized measures, because PPI is so different in different contexts, projects, organizations. There's no kind of one size fits all. So I was really heartened to see the guide that Andy Gibson and your group basically did that kind of brought together these frameworks so that people could see the different ways that you could evaluate and then pick something that works for your particular situation.
Yeah, and flexibility. So a response here and then also at the front. So here first, please.
First of all, Doreen, you totally stole my thunder there, thanks. I just wanted to hark back to somebody else's comment earlier. I totally agree that we're not being stopped from measuring impact. I mean, all the wonderful presentations that we've had so far here. But you would not, I don't think you would have a group of statisticians sat here now saying, how do we measure the impact of what we've had on research? You know, to validate your existence. And I think it also goes back to morally and ethically, isn't this the right thing to do anyway?
Is it
not that I'm disagreeing that we should do evaluation at all.
It might be that we're not just evaluating our existence, though. It might be about improvement. It might be about different ways of doing things. So actually, evaluation could be a positive. But again, it depends on your perspective, doesn't it? Absolutely. So 2 questions here from the lady.
Hi, I'm Julia Jones from the University of Hertfordshire and a PPI lead. So I thought I should stand up and make a comment. I think what's stopping us is we're not thinking about it early enough. We're not thinking about impact right at the beginning when we're sitting with my public involvement group, that we have a fantastic group at the University of Hertfordshire, and thinking about how are we going to know the difference that we're making, how are we going to document it, how are we going to plan it together, and also think of a way of measuring it, evaluating it, whatever term we want to use, that is user-friendly and something, a tool that's acceptable and usable by everybody in the team. So our co-researchers, our clinicians, if we're working our clinicians, that we're all speaking the same language and we all know what we're doing from the start.
You just pass the mic along to the lady in blue. And I've got another question at the back.
Hi, Anna from Imperial again. I think fear is one of the word, and the fact that we're coming at it from a researcher's perspective. So people, if you say to them, oh, measure impact, you think you're always trying to show something so that you can get more money for your research or whatever. So people are scared of the word impact and evaluation. If you just said to someone, speak to some patients, what do they tell you, capture what they said, how did it change your research? Everyone could do that. But when you say evaluate and impact, people are like, oh God, how do you do it? And then people try and make these complicated tools in the way that a researcher would evaluate a research project. And so we're coming at it from a researcher's perspective, not just having a conversation and learning something and changing your research.
You can almost change the question, could you say, how do we reflect on our PPI, isn't it? Evaluation seems to have a very emotive sort of term to it. Right, one final question.
Hi, Andy Gibson. Yeah, I think the issue, you can feel it in the debate in the room, is not with the word measurement, it's the fact that for a lot of the time, 8% of the time, the evaluation agenda feels quite narrow to me, because it feels like what we're talking about is PPI isn't an intervention, and the purpose of the intervention is to improve research, so let's evaluate that. And that's got massive assumptions built into it about why we're doing it, or what we were going to measure, assess, or whatever. And I think there are some people in the room who feel quite rightly uncomfortable about that because, A, I don't think it is an intervention. I think it's a very complex social process where we're trying to link across inequality. So I don't think you can treat it as an intervention. But secondly, it should be as much about the researchers demonstrating that what they're doing is of benefit to the patients as it is the other way. And the whole agenda's got turned round from where it started. And I think the person who spoke over there is exactly expressing that. And I think we need to really stop taking for granted assumptions. We maybe should be doing what Doreen suggested and redesigning how we fund research to make sure that the people who are involved on those panels have a real impact rather than thinking about just taking the status quo as given and then doing our evaluations within that context.
Fantastic points and a really rich debate. Thank you for your question, Sophie.
Right, on to Nikki. Where are we, Nikki? Let's get a microphone to Nikki. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Nikki Britton. I'm an academic at the University of Exeter College of Medicine and Health, and I'm also part of the Penn Clark PPI team. The question is, how does the use of a theory help or hinder the evaluation of patient and public involvement in research? I know a lot of people are very allergic to the idea of a theory. Some of my best friends are allergic to the idea of a theory. I put it to you that all of you have at least one theory about patient and public involvement and why it matters. You may not have thought of it as a theory. So can I just give a couple of examples from talks I've heard at this conference? So one theory, public involvement helps researchers to see what is missing in their proposals, leading to more relevant research. And another theory from another point of view, public involvement gives public members more confidence in contributing to meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments? One here at the front.
As somebody my name is Marketa Budioni, I'm a consultant in public empowerment in health research and services. I have years of experience in research and patient experience, and then I moved to professional PPI roles. Now I'm independent, but I'm saying that I have my PhD actually was in patient empowerment in health services. And when I moved to my professional role some years ago at Imperial College, I thought, okay, I know all the theories behind it, I could put them in practice. I didn't, but I see the potential actually, a massive potential of using the theories around, for example, information giving, information provision, the different levels of patient empowerment or patient involvement or however we call it. Because, and I think, it's actually a great potential in evaluation of PPI because most of the examples I came across in my professional life were around providing information and awareness about PPI and working with people slightly, but we haven't really reached the empowerment level, which according to many theories, it's actually the higher level. So it could be very, very good if we could use some of these models. So we say, for example, okay, let's start with providing awareness, what we do in this country with patient and public engagement, for example, when we usually go out that we provide information about the different scientific projects or, the different projects, and then how we can actually move on from this level within a research project or within a research agenda, because one thing doesn't fit for all, and I really think that, how we can move actually to the partnership level or consultation level or really empowerment level, at how do we distinguish between each other, at how do we evaluate or how do we know when we move from one level to another.
Thank you. Anyone like to suggest an example that they might be aware of where theory has either helped or hindered them in this approach? Or anyone else have any comments on theory? Yes.
Hi, my name is Jack. I'm a co-researcher. I think one example of a theory would be, which is probably shared by many other people here, is that research at the moment is quite undemocratic, in essence. And I think having a broad hypothesis which is shared by many people would be very helpful, because then if you're all evaluating in the same way, then you're able to see a broad impact. If you come at PPI with loads and loads of different perspectives and you each analyse and evaluate it in a very different way, then that's just really not helpful. If it's not shared at all, I've been involved in lots of different PPI projects, and some of them have been very, very useful. I've found them very useful personally, and I think they're going to have a really good impact, but some of them have been very piecemeal and very kind of, they've come once and then left and we've never seen them again. You know, and they haven't really listened or taken on board or really asked us whether what they've taken on board has actually impacted the research in the way that we thought it should. So in terms of that hypothesis that research is undemocratic, then if everybody decided later to then say, okay, now is research more democratic? And if they could say yes or no at the end of that, I think that would really help a broad evaluation of PPI.
Thank you. Can I ask you, in those, you gave different examples there of experience. Yeah. Did you have a sense of what was different about those researchers or those research teams that led to those different experiences?
I think it's more about the length of the involvement that I've had. That's been a big part. So with the project I've currently been working on, we've been doing it for a year now, and we've been involved in every single stage, including the evaluation, really, I think. And yeah, whereas in the other example that I mentioned, that was another very prestigious university, and it was one session for a couple of hours, and they took some notes, didn't take notes on other things, and they left. They told us they'd update us on the research, and they didn't update us.
Yeah. So it sounds a little bit like a difference between true involvement and somebody ticking a box somewhere to say we've done our PPI.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, can you wait for a microphone? Just any other comments after this one?
A very, very simple example is what we call patient public engagement, okay, in this country. So in my view, when we engage people, when we go to science festivals, it's what actually in many models is used, is called information provision. Okay, then we move on to information sharing. When we engage people in the festivals, for example, we have the opportunity to share some information. But when actually we involve people in research, actively all the different stages of research, and we work towards a co-production model, then to me it's actually closest to collaboration or empowerment theoretical stages, according to many theorists.
Okay, thank you. Question about comments at the back?
Hi, Dan Vale. This goes to what the gentleman here was saying, and it was also a comment this morning, I think Nuria made it, where she said, and it sort of troubled me, she said, I don't come from an Anglo-Saxon tradition, so we're a bit further behind. And I was thinking, throughout the whole of today, what's that mean? What's going on here? Trying to analyse it about the NHS, and do we feel differently about patients? And then I thought of a conference that my colleague, who's a disabled academic, went to at Columbia last year. And it was on knowledge democratization. And in those cultures, knowledge democratization, in other words, don't deal with a theory that ignores the politics of knowledge and power, because if you do, then it's going to be an adequate theory. And this was an amazing conference, she said. It happened when Grenfell Tower burnt down. And in Colombia, they heard about that, and at a conference like this, they went out onto the streets and had an impromptu demonstration about the outrageous way that the British government was treating the Grenfell residents. So it's a very political approach, but I wondered if that shed some light on this kind of atomization of theory versus seeing it in a broader context.
Okay, that's a really interesting comment. Perhaps we should all go out and demonstrate against the EU or something. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Can I put in a slightly different perspective? I come from a background, I'm here as a patient, as part of a patient advisory group, but my professional work, I was involved with environmental research. And I was commissioning research, but I was commissioning research for policy development. The policy development was based on evidence-based statistical research, but to have any weight, it needed value-based as well, so it was a skill to blend your evidence with the values, because we could go out and we could do things to grey squirrels, but we wouldn't be very popular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else got comments on evidence and values, perhaps? Are they different things? Comment over here. Keep your hand up. Lovely, thank you.
Hi, how are you? I feel like I'm going to burst into song with the microphone. Mary Galvin from Trinity. I suppose my take on this is theory brought us here. At the end of the day, there is a place for it, and there has to be a place for it, because you want whatever academic or researcher is working on this project to know their stuff, because it has to be written up in an informed way, and whether that's to push for a policy or for a new design of something, that academic is going back to other projects, more senior academics, a whole team, and they have to fight your project's corner. And they need to know the theories that support PPI, and they need to know the theories that don't, because they're going to get that thrown at them. So the researcher needs to have integrity and needs to be informed. And that's being informed of the importance of PPI and embedding it in the research design. We're all advocating that. But I think it's important to have that knowledge. And I think the last thing you want is a shoddy piece of research being written up, because that won't change anything.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no more comments, maybe we should move on to the next question.
The next question. So, Andy, now co-production, it's a bit like single-use plastic. It seems to be the word, a current word that's really crept back to prominence at the moment. I did my PhD on co-production about 30 years ago, but it's good that it's getting the attention it deserves. So Andy, your question.
Yes, I don't think there's any consensus on what co-production is. So I think some people think it's a bit of management jargon. I think some people think it's a repackaging what we've always done, and some people think of it as a radically different approach. So what would a co-produced approach to evaluating PPI look like? But I've also given a little thought, which is I think a co-produced evaluation should be about collaborating to reflect on our PPI practices. So not just a narrow agenda, but actually quite, let's open the agenda up and say, let's critically reflect on our practice and how we do it and where it needs to change, and then work collectively to identify those issues and seek solutions to tackle some of the issues that have been raised. That's a slightly different evaluation agenda, but I think that's something that needs to be discussed. And I'd be really interested to hear what people think that might look like in real life. Thank you.
Okay, so any responses to Andy? So we've got a lady down here. I have to say there's been a fantastic range of views this afternoon. Just this lady here in blue.
Thank you, Andy. That's a fantastic question, because then I can talk for ages about how wonderful we do it down in Exeter. No, I'm not going to, but I was at an evaluating engagement workshop recently, and I went there and I thought, I wonder what this is about, because I don't do any evaluation. And as we're talking in this workshop, I realized that we are doing exactly the second thing you said, reflective practice. And we're doing that with our patient group, and we're trying to bring in now community collaborators as well. And we're doing that in various ways. One way is that we are thinking about the final product that is going to describe what we do, and then we jointly together agree how we're going to tell that story. So the aim is a journal article. How do we tell the story of us, of another group down in Exeter, and yet another group up in the east coast of England? So we've got researchers there, we've got members of the public who are involved in these groups, and it takes a very long time we're working on this story for a couple of years now, because it's not funded, it is that self-evaluating practice. But every time I go out of that meeting, those meetings, which take forever to organize as well, I have learned something new about my own practice and about other people's practice. So comparative, I guess what I'm telling is one story that we have from Exeter, which is about that kind of reflective practice together with others who do the same stuff in different ways.
Excellent point. Another from Tessa?
Just reflecting, as we all are, in terms of a co-produced approach to evaluation, is part of the problem here is that we're not actually, as somebody said, thinking sufficiently upstream. So if you think about the outcome measures, maybe we've got to think, the outcomes that matter to patients. Well, what matters to patients in any particular study might be, do I influence about the way this clinician is going to practice in the future? What will the contribution of this to be the culture shift in healthcare that I'm looking for? So in other words, do we actually need to be hugely more imaginative about the outcomes that we're looking for in a given study, which extend way beyond, some hard measurements of blood pressure or whatever, to what extent a lot more effort in upstream and redefine what the good outcome of a study might be in a much broader way, perhaps.
Excellent point. And lady at the front, and then...
What it say. I thought even if it is small, it is answering some of the questions about collaboration and cooperation. It's called effective involvement. A report in the design and evaluation of a research awareness training package for public involvement in health research. I've had so many things that have been said this afternoon that in some way found in that poster. I was involved in it, or the briefest way for me to say is we were involved from beginning to the end. It is we, the PPI, who wrote the evaluation. It is we, the PPI, who did the training. The training was offered by National Institute of Health Research, and you might see something else about that in here. And probably because I've got the mic now, I could answer a question, I don't know. I could comment on question 3, question 2, and question something else in terms of why we can't ditch or we shouldn't ditch PPI. And the shortest way I can put it is, a few years, I don't know how many of you know about LEN, a network called LEN, Lived Experience something, and I attended a conference in Sunderland University, and the dean said, specifically I think he said this because PPI in universities have already established themselves. So whether they, to some degree, whether it was going to be funded in the future or not, is irrelevant. The students want it, the impact that the patients are having on, in letting them associate practice with the theory. So the dean there, when he opened the convention, said, we need to do this simply because the students want it. And even if no, not because the students want it, because it is the right thing to do. So
it's a moral argument almost.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. I think that's really true as well about the learning. I think you made a really good point that hasn't necessarily come through. Again, that's about how we can actually build on that learning as well. Do you have a question?
Elspeth Matthew from Hertfordshire University in Cardiff, East of England. I was interested, a lot of these questions are from academics as well, so I think also following on from this about this co-production of evaluation, isn't it us as researchers who we should be evaluating how well we've done it? Because if it doesn't work in a project, it's probably us as researchers who haven't done it very well rather than the PPI. So about reflecting and learning together, I think it is very much us as researchers. We are learning and we'd like to hear how to do it better. I know I've been involved in lots of projects and some have gone well, some haven't. And so I think that's the other question about binning PPI. I think it's actually binning some of us researchers, or until learning how we can do it better.
Good point. Has anyone else got any comments on that? So there's two at the front and then a lady there. Okay.
Hi, Rebecca Baines from Plymouth University. I think going back to the idea of how do you co-produce evaluation is firstly ensuring that the patient voice is there throughout any tool that you design to evaluate. I think we're very good at saying, okay, as academics, this is what we've produced, patients, how do you feel about it? It's got to be from the outset. You can't go with them to the finished product, essentially getting their sign-off. But I think there's also a broader question of, are we evaluating the outcome or the process of our PPI? And I think it's we are judged as kind of researchers on, I think someone talked about it earlier, kind of publish or perish. So we see that outcome as the pivotal goal, and it's not. Some research I've been doing now has really taught me it's not the final destination, it's the journey, and it's the person you're travelling with or the team that you're travelling with. How have those people experienced your PPI process? And I think we're potentially at risk if we developed a kind of generic evaluation tool, whether that's been co-produced or not. It kind of diminishes the importance of tailoring your PPI initiative to the local context. And again, maybe the evaluation of one size fits all still applies. Or doesn't fit all.
Yeah, good point. So, were there any hands? Did you have a point? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lynn Leibler. I'm a patient involved in research, and I'm sitting in it and I'm listening to all of this, and it just feels like stuff that's been done to me, because I've never ever heard, I go to a lot of conferences here, a lot of patients speak, I never ever hear them saying, oh, I got involved in PPI because I really wanted my involvement evaluated, or looking at what value I had and whatever. And and I'm not saying, and a lot of people that know me would say that I'm very critical about what I do in PPI and whatever, but there's a sense, I have a sense of that's good, that we should be teaching people to critically evaluate what they're doing as they go along. And as someone who's in Scotland, co-production, a lot of these things that we're talking about, let's evaluate this, let's evaluate that, it's not happening on the ground in some parts of the UK. There's an absolute and total unequal platform across the UK in terms of networks, in terms of the value that government or funding places on PPI. So, England, you're 10 years ahead of where we are. You're running ahead with all these things, and some parts of the UK are running after you, trying to catch up, and these issues are not.
I would say that's somehow part of the debate, though, because if there is that postcode lottery and not the opportunities to get involved in meaningful PPI, I would say that's something that actually an evaluation of sorts would pick up. So it's not simply about evaluating whether we should do it or not. I think it's about saying it has to be that kind of, there's equity issues there, there's moral issues there that you've raised. So I think it is about widening that debate out. I think
I just
very
like
important.
better opportunities.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, really good point. So we've got time for one more before we move on to the next question.
Andy, just in response to your question, we could look at the involved guidance on co-production and the elements it brings out, and do what Julia said, which was to plan early and think about where do we want to see those elements reflected in projects. The trouble is, what we've also got to have is support from the funders to fund that, and support from our institutions to understand the governance issues, the ethics issues, and everything else. And that's where we really struggle. And I think the focus on a lot of evaluation is falling on projects and individuals and our organisations. And this is, we're struggling with our organisations who don't understand often what we're doing. So I think it's not just that we don't want to do certain things. There are times when it's really, really challenging, and that organisational context is something we need to think about. But I think there's loads of potential, and I hope our funders think about pilots, which I know they already are, and for us to capture those. I think there's something about capturing that learning, because otherwise it's lost, and none of us then benefit collectively.
Yeah, absolutely, really good point. I mean, on that point of the lady at the front made, I'm a patient, a carer, and a professional, so I have a bit of a schizophrenic sort of identity. But I went along to the hospital the other day for my particular medical condition, and I offered to take part in research. I said, is there any research I can get involved in? And I just got the response, no, I wouldn't worry about that. There's nothing for you here. So I think there is a massive postcode lottery, and it varies between disciplines, it varies between sectors. So actually part of the evaluation, I think, is actually how we can take the learning from other sectors and apply it to areas that need it most, both be it geographical or be it also sort of different disciplines as well. So I think there's something there from that whole kind of co-production approach. So thank you very much for that session, and now question 7.
Tina, where are we? Can we get a microphone to Tina, please?
Yes, good afternoon everybody. I'm Tina Coldham, I'm chair of the Involve Advisory Group, and I've also done a lot of work over the years as a survivor researcher. So it always interests me, this conversation about having the public and patients involved in research. I'm very much for user-led research. So, you know, let's think about this then. Where research is user, that's patient, public, survivor-led, does this change how we evaluate it?
Thank you. A challenging question is response down here at the front, please.
Thank you. Olivia, and I've already spoken. So, I think what I'd say in response to that, I think if we change how we evaluate it, if it's been user-led, then it's devaluating the user, because we're on an equal platform to the researchers. So if it's being evaluated differently, it's meaning that the sort of author is different from the researcher. Whereas if it's user-led, then the user is just as good as a researcher, so it shouldn't be different.
Any other comments on this question? Again, one at the back there, please. Keep your hand up and there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that with some research studies, there can be a tendency to think that if it's user-led, then that is enough user involvement in itself. And I think that user-led research should still have the same kind of focus on it, as whether or not it's involved, for example, a whole group of an advisory panel with different service users on it.
Thank you. Comment from here?
Sally Hensman, PPI coordinator from Clark, South London. I think there are maybe two areas, the how it is evaluated and how it should be evaluated. There is always that challenge that some of the time when research is user-led, there's an assumption it's less objective, in inverted commas, than research that is led by clinicians or other researchers, when in fact there is no such thing as this absolutely objective researcher or research team. People come to research always with some kind of bias and influenced by societies and values and perspectives. So there is a risk of it being devalued when it may be extremely valuable. I think the other side is to be continually aware in terms of evaluation of research that sometimes the values that are embedded may be values that have been developed in a system in which the researchers are very seldom service users or carers or coming at it from a public perspective, or if they are, they may downplay that aspect of who they are. So in terms of evaluation, there may be things to be learnt about evaluating research generally by focusing particularly on user-led research and maybe broadening the evaluation perspectives and methods of learning what really can be of value in what research offers to those taking part in wider society.
Thank you. Two in the middle there, please.
Just a quick question. It's just that I would have loved to have added a little bit to your question, which is how do we evaluate it? We should evaluate it, I think, as we evaluate anything else. But how do we encourage it is what I would like to know. You know, it seems to me we're still, you know, here we are talking about the impact of PPI. You know, how do we get more serious co-production in the research agenda? How do we support those patients who are forging out there and actually leading on the research agenda? I mean, we have one patient who advises us on our international advisory panel who is very passionate about N-of-1 research and has done some fantastic studies. She just went up for a PhD viva and they said, oh, we're not sure about the ethics of you experimenting on yourself, and it all went terribly pear-shaped. I better not say where this went. I'm sure it will all be resolved. But so let's think more about that. You know, again, upstream.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Lodonskaya. I'm a services researcher and I have done user-led research. And I think that the question is probably a bit provocative on the part of Tina. For me, you could read it as, you know, what are we evaluating here? Is that the research or the researcher? I think there's a danger of reading it as, you know, because the research is user-led, question mark, quality, question mark, you know, is it good enough, is it robust enough, like, you know, traditional, conventional research of sort, and see what happens. So, for me, from my point of view, if I do user-led research, I expect it to be evaluated like any other research, because otherwise we're in danger of evaluating the researcher because they are a patient or member of the public rather than the piece of work that they have produced.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this fits in here, but there was a slide yesterday in one of the workshops that I found incredibly interesting. I found lots of the slides interesting, but and I'm Sue Fortescue, by the way, I help with PPI in various projects. And it was a presentation yesterday being given in a workshop by somebody who is or was an emergency paramedic. And they evaluated which outcomes matter to patients. And so you have one column which is the PPI group and one column which is systematic review. And in the PPI group, the very top priority was quality of life. But quality of life only came fourth in the systematic review. Now, I wonder what impact that will have on any actions. Is this just something that is being noted, that, oh, isn't this interesting, or is something actually going to happen from it? Because this is the public saying what they want out of care.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I think we've heard a lot, haven't we, over the last couple of days about the importance of listening to the ultimate beneficiaries of research, and it's good to hear that again. Thank you. Any other comments on this question? One thing that strikes me, we keep using this term evaluation all afternoon, and of course what sits at the middle of evaluation is value. And so much of what I hear over the last couple of days is about how we value one another in this joint initiative. Let's not forget that.
And I think that's a very good segue into the next question, which is my favourite question, which is from Christina. Christina, your question's about learning.
I'm Christina, desperate for a cup of tea, I think.
You and me both.
So, my question is, when we focus on the two-way learning that happens during PPI research, how does that change how we evaluate it? So, rather than thinking about it as an intervention, we're looking for an outcome. The experience, the interaction, if we think of it that way, what's different?
Excellent question. So very much what we've heard a lot about is about that kind of emphasis on learning, on reflection. So has anyone got any comments or questions about that? I'm aware that we're all desperate for a cup of tea. Some more than others.
Louise Lowcock, shortest person in the room, probably. At the risk of being a bit fangirl, when I read some of Christina's stuff about let's just stop thinking about evaluating the impact on research and think about the impact on researchers, it was kind of light bulb for me. And it links up to lots of other things I'm thinking about, sort of conversation rather than involvement, reflective practice rather than evaluation. Yeah, maybe I'm just getting old and lightening up a bit.
Comments behind?
Could I just ask, when the question says, how do we evaluate it? Who are the we? Are they the researchers? Will the PPI representatives be part of the evaluation process? And just following on from that, if you're on a long-term study and you've become embedded in that study as a PPI representative, does that give you the right or the opportunity to evaluate whether the research has been conducted well by the researcher or the whole team in terms of the way that they have addressed PPI?
Excellent comment. Yeah. Has anyone got anything to add to that? Or Christina, do you want to come back on for clarification on what you meant by the we?
I think of the PPI community as a whole, really. I guess it's all of us, isn't it? And we all have different views on it and experiences of it. And so we need all of those.
Excellent. Any more kind of comments on that kind of two-way learning and if that changes anything?
Hi. Hello. I think we talk a lot about impact evaluation these 2 days. We haven't talked a lot about feedback. And I think because what is the value of PPI, and I think all of these things are interrelated really, because we talk about how we evaluate it. Again, we totally agree with Christina. When we say we, at this place of time, we talk about everybody. So we're talking about researchers, professionals, and members of the public or patients with any condition. So how do we, and again, it goes back to one of the fundamental issues that we heard again and again, which is about relationships. Because PPI is about effective and good relationships. So how do we marry, I don't respond to that, it's just a comment. So how do we put all this together? So how do we work effectively together for the best research and the best value with whatever we do?
Hello, no pressure then. People want a cup of tea. Duncan Barron, I'm from RDS South East and also the Centre for Public Engagement in Kingston. So I'll pose the question, but I think I might pull together some comments that have already been made, if I may. So the question is, what is the value of evaluating all the PPI input to the research, including paid PPI professionals, rather than just concentrating on patients and the public? And we've already heard some very interesting comments already about looking perhaps at all the parties involved. I thought the comment from the colleague who gave the insight from a HR perspective, I thought that was very interesting. There's been a comment about collective reflection on all our practice and how well we've all done it as well. So I think that's been very helpful, but I obviously welcome further comments.
Perhaps piece of research is something that is co-produced and disseminated, co-disseminated as well, if you like, that all those elements should be working together and they should all be evaluated and not just the PPI.
Another question over here? Comment?
just a clarification, is PPI professional like PPI leads and things? Okay, so then my point is relevant. I think that's a really interesting point. I am a PPI lead, and as are many other people in the room, and I'm sure all of us have had completely different experiences in our life in terms of our degree or our previous jobs. I came from research funding, 5 years in that, so I looked at applications and things like that, but I know PPI leads who are nurses, who are researchers, they all have different backgrounds. So we all probably advise our researchers or support them and support patient public care members in different ways. So I think that's a very interesting point, because say myself and 3 other people who are PPI leads looked at the same application and gave advice as how to do PPI, and that we'd probably all give slightly different, because it depends on what I know and what they know is what we would advise. So I think it's a very interesting point.
Thank you. Antoine? Put your hand up, Antoine, so we can get a mic to you. Thank you.
Hello, Antoine from Canada. That's a good question, Duncan. I think there's a lot of value in there. So part of the evaluation for me is about reflecting. I've heard, and I think it's very nice, the idea of reflecting on our own relationship and how we can work together better. But there's also a lot to learn about what sort of conditions can we put in place to nurture those relationships. And oftentimes these are the levers that we have access to make things better. So we need to create environments that sustain meaningful relationships. And that's where that touches to the organizations, the support, the leadership, the funding, the facilitation, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot of actionable learning that we can get from looking beyond the individuals.
Thank you. One, Sophie down here. Put your hand up, Sophie. Thank you. Okay. Sophie, sorry, there's someone else with a mic I haven't approved.
From Parkinson's UK. I think this is a really good question, and I think working for a charity, this is something that we're supporting. Part of my role is supporting researchers and people affected by Parkinson's to work together, and it's really important for us that, me as the research involvement manager and my team, that we're evaluating and looking at whether and people affected by Parkinson's to work together is working, because if it's not, then we need to change, the approaches that we're using. So yeah, I think this is definitely really relevant, and it's something that we should be doing.
Thank you.
I just wanted to pick up on this idea of evaluation only focusing on patients and the public, just to reassure people that when we conduct research, we evaluate every single bit of it, how well it's worked, what's been the limitations. That's such a key part of the way we work. And we evaluate ourselves as researchers. Where are we lacking? What do we need? So I think just to balance that out, when we write our reports and we say study limitations, it is about those things. Probably less often we say PPI was limited in these ways, and that's because of X, and that's what we need to address. Probably we do less of that, actually. These are sort of our limitations laid bare. So I think it helps us move forward into the next study and think about it. So I just wanted to just create that balance, I think.
Can I add to this? Actually, we're talking with Sophie before we pick up the microphone here. Can I add to this that I think it's a misconception. I spoke to some members of the public earlier today at the thought when we were talking about evaluation yesterday, today. We're talking actually about evaluating the patients and the public. I don't think that anybody here is coming from a professional or from a research point of view. We don't evaluate the people. Okay, we evaluate the process, the methods, the ways that we work, and the relationship with them. So it's all part of the research process. In my view, it should be amalgamated into everything. So as we evaluate ourselves as researchers, we evaluate the processes, the methods. Going back to the PPI professionals, being a PPI professional for some years, I think yes, we should go actually do this mode of evaluating our work, and the models have changed all the time. So there are different ways of doing that better or more effectively. There are tools out there, and again, as PPI professionals, we should go into the mode of evaluating our work separately and as part of research projects, but also as separate if we have the programs or strategies, how well we do. And again, there are tools out there to do that.
Thank you. One of the things I've heard a few times this afternoon, and a risk that I think we need to be very aware of and do everything we can to avoid, is this idea that somehow evaluation of PPI is about researchers evaluating patients and public. And I think that's absolutely critical that we keep that to mind. I'm seeing a lot of nodding on both sides of the room there. Any other comments? Yes, please. The anticipation builds.
I forgot to introduce myself before. I'm Kristin Jarvo from Exeter. Actually Norway, but living in Exeter. Yeah, so I didn't understand your question first, Duncan. I was like, what is... And I've had a light bulb moment, and I just went, oh, right. Actually, can we evaluate also the stuff that goes in? Like the amount of resource. Is it enough? You know, can we evaluate the room that it happens in? Is this a nice room? Can we evaluate, I was at a workshop yesterday and somebody said tablecloths that you can write on, and you heard the whole room, you know, we love post-it notes, right? Can we evaluate that stuff as well, maybe? What do you think?
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, then I think we should first of all say thank you to all of those who developed these stimulating questions and got us all talking. So please let's thank them. Most importantly, thank you all for your contributions to that discussion. I think it was very rich. And what we're going to be doing with it is Lynn and Susan have been taking notes with a view to giving you some initial perceptions, initial feelings of what's been discussed today in the final session. So that's to encourage you all to come back, of course. But we will be spending more time analysing that over forthcoming days, and we'll be circulating a more in-depth analysis of what we've heard today in future to all of you. So thank you again very much for all your contributions to this session. I think we've got a slightly longer tea break now, so enjoy that. Just before you do go though, you'll notice that the next plenary session starts at 4:30, so we'll need to get the parallel sessions finishing around about 4:20 to allow you to come back to the final plenary. Okay, thank you very much.